Hey friends, it's Jimmy here with my usual reminder to hit the like and subscribe buttons and the notification bell. And don't forget to leave a comment saying where you're listening from, especially if you're tuning in from California. It was October 12th, 1944, when West Hollywood's upscale El Palacio apartments awoke to horror. A maid discovered 20-year-old oil heiress Georgette Bauerdorf lifeless in her bathtub. The bathwater was tinted pink with blood, and Georgette was half submerged and unresponsive. The cops arrived and quickly determined she was the victim of foul play. This shocking crime scene marked the beginning of a Hollywood mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Georgette was born into privilege but yearned to contribute on the home front as the world had become engulfed in conflict. After her family moved from New York to Los Angeles, she graduated from a prestigious girls' school and embraced volunteer work. By 1944, the young heiress was serving as a junior hostess at the Hollywood Canteen, a famous club where movie stars entertained American servicemen on leave. For Georgette, being a canteen hostess was both an honor and a thrill. The nightclub was co-founded by Hollywood heavy hitter Betty Davis and offered GIs food and fun. Georgette's friendly charm and generosity made her a favorite among the troops. She was known to offer weary servicemen a place to sleep at her apartment, letting them crash on her downstairs sofa while she stayed upstairs. Her friends adored her spirit, though some worried she was too trusting with strangers during these tumultuous times. On the evening of October 11th, 1944, Georgette reported for her usual Wednesday night shift at the Hollywood Canteen, greeting and dancing with servicemen as always. That night, a particularly persistent soldier kept asking her to jitterbug, a dance she disliked, but she politely deflected his requests and continued her hostess duties. Around 11:30 p.m., Georgette left the canteen and drove home alone in her black coupe. She had mentioned to at least one friend that she was expecting a late-night phone call from her boyfriend, a soldier in Texas, and needed to be home for it. In fact, she had recently purchased a plane ticket and planned to fly to El Paso soon to visit this sweetheart, a trip she would never take. Investigators later deduced that Georgette arrived at her West Hollywood apartment around midnight. An open can of green string beans and melon rinds in her trash suggested she fixed a quick snack before bed. She then changed into pajamas and perhaps began writing in her diary or reading in bed. A diary and newspaper were found open in her room, implying she was winding down for the night. At roughly 2:30 that morning, a neighbor was jolted awake by a chilling scream echoing through the building. He heard a woman crying out and pleading before the voice was suddenly silenced. Thinking it might have been a lover's quarrel that ended quickly, or perhaps even something highly spicy, the neighbor went back to sleep. When Georgette's maid, Lulu Atwood, arrived the next morning, she found the apartment door wide open and water running in the bathroom. Georgette's body was face down in an overflowing tub, wearing only her pajama top. Police at first considered the possibility of an accidental drowning, but the evidence quickly proved otherwise. The light bulb over the outside entrance had been carefully unscrewed just enough to disable it, plunging the doorway into darkness. This pointed to a calculated attack, and police suspected the perp may have entered earlier using a key and lain in wait, ambushing her once she was home. Inside, Georgette's knuckles were bruised and there were deep marks on her head and abdomen, indicating she had put up a fierce fight. The coroner found that she had been brutally assaulted and strangled. A strip of cloth had been viciously shoved down her throat to asphyxiate her. Further testing revealed that it was an unusual type of medical bandage rarely seen in America, leading to speculation her attacker was a serviceman who had acquired it overseas. Notably, there was no water in her lungs, meaning Georgette was already dead before the tub was filled. Other clues perplexed investigators. Georgette's valuable jewelry and money were left largely untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. Only about $100 was missing from her purse, even though far greater sums of cash and jewels were in plain view. And I'm not talking about regular jewels here. This is oil baroness stuff after all. Her car was gone from the garage, and it was soon found abandoned miles away, out of gas and sporting a fresh dent on one fender. Fingerprints were lifted from the vehicle and from inside, but they matched no one in law enforcement records. Investigators also found cigarette butts on the floor of Georgette's home, an eerie discovery given that she didn't smoke. This led detectives to speculate that he may have stayed after, smoking while taking in the deed he had just committed. News of the glamorous young woman's slaying made headlines around the nation, and a task force of Los Angeles sheriff's detectives and military police sprang into action. Because of Georgette's role at the canteen, dozens of soldiers she had met were investigated. Police eliminated many potential suspects by checking military logs. Any enlisted man absent overnight without leave was scrutinized, and most were accounted for. Some of the men were targeted by investigators in a more direct way for their connection or perceived ties to Georgette. The pushy patron from the canteen was tracked down and quickly cleared. He had been signed into his barracks at the time the attack went down. Detectives also tracked a very tall soldier who Georgette had briefly dated, as well as the army sergeant to whom she'd given a ride that night. Both men were questioned, but neither was ever tied to the crime. Leads continued to surface from all corners. One disturbed man in San Francisco actually confessed, but his story turned out to be false and attention-seeking. Another suspect, picked up for an unrelated slaying in Glendale, was briefly suspected but ultimately ruled out. Because Georgette often lost her keys and had multiple duplicates made, police considered whether someone had obtained a copy to access her apartment. As I mentioned, it's believed that someone had ambushed her in her apartment. Disturbingly, he likely stayed in hiding for a significant time while she was already home. Despite extensive interviews and the tantalizing evidence left behind, every promising lead led nowhere. Georgette's father, with the help of family friend William Randolph Hearst, even pressed authorities to solve the case swiftly, to avoid scandal and gossip. Months passed with no arrest, and the trail grew cold. In the years that followed, the tragic story of Georgette Bauerdorf gradually faded from the headlines. It remains unclear if any forensic evidence from the scene was stored, though I assume that since forensic genetic testing was basically 5 decades away, it wouldn't have been. However, on the off chance the evidence remains in an evidence locker somewhere, there's a faint hope that one day this California unsolved mystery may be resolved. A chilling scream rang out on a quiet West Hollywood street in the early hours of February 12, 1977. Moments later, aspiring actress Krista Helm lay dying in front of her agent's home, stabbed dozens of times in a savage attack. The perp left no witnesses and few clues behind. Decades later, the question of who killed her and why remains one of Hollywood's most baffling, unsolved mysteries of that era. Born in Milwaukee, Krista moved to New York and then Los Angeles chasing stardom, leaving behind a young daughter from a brief teenage marriage. Disturbingly, both parents effectively abandoned their daughter, though Krista promised to return at some point in the future. Needless to say, fate intervened and this promise would never be fulfilled. She landed some modeling gigs and a starring film role, a low-budget action movie called Let's Go for Broke in 1974. But the film flopped after a short run. Instead, Krista became better known as a quote-unquote socialite on the Hollywood party scene. She mingled with big names, reportedly dating NFL superstar Joe Namath, rock legend Mick Jagger, and even having some close encounters with the Shah of Iran. Ambitious and charismatic, Krista made friends in high places and enjoyed the trappings of wealth, without any real known source of income. Privately, Krista also kept a secret diary where she documented her intimate encounters, complete with candid details and a rating system for her lovers. Allegations made in the years following her death even claimed that she was working as an escort to the rich and powerful. I do have to include a disclaimer here and mention that these are just allegations, though I'm sure my description of her lifestyle may have already have had some of you thinking this. By 1977, with her career stalled and money running low, she whispered about turning her diary into fat stacks with a tell-all book. If the rumors are to be believed, she had some seriously compromising material about some sick puppies in high places, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Late on February 11th, 1977, Krista left a party in Los Angeles and drove to meet her agent at his West Hollywood home. She arrived around 1:30 a.m., but before she could reach the door, an unknown assailant ambushed her on the quiet residential street. The attacker stabbed Krista repeatedly with a knife and also struck her with a blunt object, leaving her collapsed in a pool of blood next to the curb. A passerby soon discovered her body and rushed to get help. By the time police arrived, however, Krista had already succumbed to her injuries at just 27 years old. Some reports said she was still clutching her car keys, suggesting the attacker struck the instant she stepped out of her vehicle. Neighbors later recalled hearing a single terrifying scream during the night of the attack, but no one witnessed the attacker. When investigators surveyed the scene, they realized that Krista's purse was missing, and with it, her infamous diary. Its disappearance led police to suspect that the attacker's primary motive was to take or destroy that tell-all journal. If someone feared what Krista had written, stealing the diary would eliminate the threat. Detectives also learned that Krista had allegedly sometimes tape-recorded her spicy encounters, but those audio tapes were nowhere to be found either. The vanishing of these personal items robbed investigators of crucial evidence, and strongly suggested that someone wanted Krista's secrets to die with her. With Krista's tumultuous love life and high-profile connections, the list of potential suspects was long. Investigators theorized that an ex-lover might have had a personal motive to silence her, especially if they knew about her diary and feared exposure. Given that Krista was struggling financially, she had every incentive to monetize her secrets, which could have alarmed anyone with something to hide. Over time, more clues have added to the intrigue. Krista's friends later recalled that she seemed fearful in her final days. In fact, a few months before the slaying, she sent a postcard to a close friend saying she was in over her head and might need to disappear for a while. This alarming message suggests Krista sensed danger looming. Notably, decades later, it was claimed that she was part of an elite escort operation, which some have speculated had ties to intelligence. This raised the distinct possibility she was eliminated because she knew too much about powerful people, even if they didn't know about her secret diary. In 2005, her daughter persuaded the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to reopen the cold case for a fresh investigation. A team of detectives pored over the old evidence and tracked down witnesses who had never spoken. They uncovered a few new leads, including the discovery that Krista's close friend allegedly sent an acquaintance to clean out her apartment right after the attack. It's believed that the tapes, her illicit diary, and other personal items were removed during this process. When questioned by the authorities, the individual who allegedly orchestrated this claimed that he didn't really remember Krista and offered no information whatsoever. And for my Sopranos fans out there, according to a report by CBS News in 2008, the man who actually did the removal was allegedly Tony Sirico, who played Paulie Walnuts. I always thought he was just a good actor, but after browsing his Wikipedia article, It seems like he may have been bringing some serious life experience to the role. I don't have any evidence to directly prove it, but I can virtually guarantee that Krista wasn't taken out at random. She talked about publishing a tell-all book at a moment when her diary allegedly named celebrities, political figures, and embattled foreign royalty. She was also making audio recordings of herself with influential and powerful men, for reasons which remain unclear. It's not hard to see how someone rich and powerful would have seen her as a liability who needed to be handled. To back this up, within hours of her slaying, the items that could damage reputations vanished into the ether, never to resurface. Her apparent fear in the months before her death, including the postcard hinting she might need to disappear, adds to the sense that pressure was building. I also find it weird how her so-called friend, someone who had apparent access to her house, claimed to barely remember her decades later. But hey, maybe it was all completely random. Stranger things have happened after all. Beneath the shimmering blue surface of Lake Tahoe, at depths where sunlight fades to black, something enormous is said to stir. Locals and visitors alike have long whispered about a colossal creature lurking below, a legend affectionately known as Tahoe Tessie. Like a West Coast cousin to Scotland's Loch Ness Monster, Tessie's story blends local history, natural wonder, and a dose of mystery that refuses to die. Or in this case, perhaps it literally did die. But stick around because I'll get to that shortly. Tahoe Tessie is the name given to a supposed lake monster dwelling in the depths of Lake Tahoe, which straddles the California-Nevada border in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Descriptions of Tessie portray a long, serpentine creature with a smooth, dark, or sometimes turquoise-colored body, often likened to a prehistoric reptile. Long before Tessie became a regionally known name, the indigenous Washoe people told stories of powerful water spirits inhabiting Tahoe's waters. In Washoe legend, mysterious water babies were said to live around Cave Rock, a sacred lakeside formation, and could punish those who disturbed the lake. These tales of something uncanny in the water set the stage for later interpretations that morphed into the modern Tessie legend. However, it looks as though the Washoe people never claimed these creatures to be a serpentine entity. Rather, they were seen as spirits that protected the lake, or perhaps spirits of the lake, in an animistic sense. One of the earliest European American accounts of a Tahoe monster dates back to the mid-1800s. In 1865, a San Francisco socialite named Irving Coggin claimed he encountered an enormous serpent on the lake's shore. According to his later published account, the creature had a head 14 feet wide and a body hundreds of feet long that crushed small trees as it slithered by. Coggin insisted that sooner or later the beast would be seen by so many people that all doubt of its existence would vanish. His dramatic tale, though not verified, marked the beginning of Tessie's presence in local lore and sparked the imagination of early visitors to Tahoe. After Coggin's sensational story, reports of Tessie were sporadic for many years. It wasn't until the late 20th century that Tessie truly resurfaced in the public eye with a flurry of new sightings. In the 1980s, sightings of a large unknown creature in Lake Tahoe spiked, and many came from credibly astonished observers. One off-duty police officer, while water skiing, reported seeing a giant fish at least 10 feet long glide under him. Around the same time, an optician, a pair of nuns, and no fewer than 10 employees of the Tahoe City Post Office all claimed to have witnessed something peculiar. They saw a huge dark shape cutting through the lake's water, leaving a large wake. These independent reports, surprisingly consistent in describing a large, black, serpentine form, gave the Tessie legend a new level of legitimacy in the public's mind. Even into the 2000s, new encounters with Tessie continued to trickle in. In 2005, two visitors on a Tahoe beach reported seeing a large, dark shape with multiple hump-like peaks emerge about 100 yards offshore before submerging again. This, of course, is a classic lake monster sighting, albeit with no photos to prove it. Around the same time, other boaters and swimmers would occasionally describe unexplained disturbances in the water. However, in recent years, these sightings have grown infrequent, curiously right in time for everyone to have high-quality cameras on them at all times. By the 2010s and beyond, reports of Tessie largely dried up, leading some locals to half-jokingly wonder if the creature might have bit the biscuit. With no hard evidence of Tessie's existence, people have proposed a range of theories to explain what might be behind the sightings. These ideas run the gamut from biological possibilities to optical illusions and pure folklore. Many suspect that sightings of Tessie could really be encounters with an unusually large fish. The prime candidate is a sturgeon, a massive prehistoric-looking fish known to reach up to 12 feet in length and sporting a long, shark-like form. Sturgeons are bottom feeders and not native to Lake Tahoe, but researchers have noted it's possible one could have been introduced and survived in the deep waters. Such a fish surfacing could easily be mistaken for a monster, since it unironically does appear to be a prehistoric beast. In fact, in the 1980s, a team of biologists concluded that a large sturgeon was the most likely explanation for the Tahoe monster reports at the time. Personally, I like this theory, since it does acknowledge that the abundance of strange sightings may have had a basis in reality. It also means that this creature may have simply gone to the great pond in the sky, causing reports to dry up. Plus, having seen live sturgeons in a captive setting, I can only imagine what it would look like running into one of those puppies in the wild. Some Tessie enthusiasts have suggested the creature could be a holdover from the age of dinosaurs, perhaps a plesiosaur or other ancient marine reptile that somehow survived in isolation. This idea is inspired by Tessie's long neck and paddle-like hump descriptions, which sound similar to portrayals of the Loch Ness Monster. However, scientists are quick to point out serious issues with this theory. Lake Tahoe in its current form is only about 2 to 3 million years old, far younger than any dinosaur, and it's a freshwater alpine lake with no direct link to the prehistoric seas. In short, there's no scientific basis to believe a marine dinosaur could be hiding in Tahoe. The simplest explanation, of course, is that Tessie isn't a creature at all, but rather a case of mistaken identity and natural optical illusions. Lake Tahoe's waters are known for their clarity and peculiar wave patterns. Wind gusts and boat wakes can create strange humps and ripples on the lake surface that can look uncannily like a multi-humped creature swimming along. Floating logs, driftwood, or even clusters of aquatic plants can also form serpent-like shapes, especially when viewed at a distance or at twilight. Many reported sightings of Tessie have likely been people seeing these sorts of phenomena and misinterpreting them as a monster. Human perception is easily tricked by the play of light and water, a fact well documented in other lakes known for monster legends. In Lake Tahoe's case, the combination of extremely deep water, wave conditions, and the power of suggestion might be enough to convince observers that something big is in there. So for any long-time viewers of my channel, you'll know that I have something that I like to call the law of lake monsters. The law is simple. If there's a statue of the lake monster by the lake, it's definitely 100% a real creature. No more questions asked. Unfortunately for Tessie, she doesn't make the cut, because as far as I can tell, there's no Tessie monument by the lake. So hey, if you live or vacation in the Lake Tahoe region and you're invested in this lake legend, consider crowdfunding a statue. Hey everyone, Jimmy here once again with a quick reminder to hit that notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to click that share button and send my video to your friends and family who enjoy true crime and mystery content. For 4 years, no one even realized that Heather Bloom was missing. From late 2005 until 2009, her disappearance went entirely unreported, a delay that hindered efforts to find her. Heather was a 28-year-old woman with Down syndrome who depended on others for every aspect of her care. Yet she managed to vanish without a trace from Berkeley, California in 2005 on a trip from New York where her mother dumped her off with her sister. Even more chilling, the only person who might know what happened refused to let anyone see Heather and then quietly left the country in the years that followed. It seemed unthinkable that a vulnerable woman like Heather could vanish without anyone noticing, but it happened. Nearly 2 decades later, the question remains, what really happened to Heather Bloom? Heather had spent her entire life in New York, so a trip to California was a major change for her. Heather's story took a mysterious turn in the fall of 2005 when she and her mother stayed with Heather's sister Sherry. This visit would be the last time Heather was seen by anyone outside her family. During the stay, police were called to Sherry's apartment to intervene in a loud argument between Phyllis, the mother, and Sherry, with Heather in the middle of the commotion. The officers diffused the situation, and once things calmed down, Phyllis returned home to New York, leaving Heather in Sherry's care at the Berkeley apartment. That unusual handoff of Heather to Sherry marked the beginning of Heather's unexplained absence. For a while, nothing apparently seemed amiss, and after Phyllis left California, she apparently lost contact with both of her daughters. She heard no updates from Sherry and had no direct communication with Heather. Heather, a vulnerable adult who couldn't speak for herself, simply vanished from public view. There were no familiar neighbors or friends in California to notice her absence, and Heather wasn't enrolled in any local care programs or services that might have raised an alarm. It wasn't until June 2009, nearly 4 years later, that Phyllis finally reported Heather missing. When Berkeley police opened a missing person investigation in 2009, they were already years behind. Detectives discovered that Sherry had moved out of her apartment back in 2007, leaving no sign of where Heather had gone. It took months to track Sherry down, and when they finally located her in March 2010, the mystery only deepened. Sherry refused to let officers inside her home, speaking to them only through a window. She insisted that Heather was fine, but would not allow anyone to see her, offering no evidence of her sister's well-being. This evasive behavior raised immediate red flags for the police, who feared for Heather's safety. However, it also put law enforcement in a bind. They were alarmed, but without clear evidence of wrongdoing or a court order, there was little they could do to force Sherry's compliance. Police soon uncovered more unsettling details. Sherry's landlord and neighbors reported that they had never seen Heather at the apartment, not even once. Shortly after that tense welfare check, Sherry abruptly packed up and moved again, disappearing before authorities could learn anything more about Heather's fate. She was evicted from the apartment for owing around $13,000 in back rent, suggesting a chaotic and unstable situation. Once Sherry left town this time, the trail to find Heather went cold again. Years passed with no sign of either sister. Finally, in 2016, a breakthrough. Investigators learned that Sherry had left the country and gone to Norway on a student visa. She had moved overseas for school, which explained why she had been so hard to find. Sherry's relocation abroad posed a major roadblock for the investigation. Berkeley police and local journalists tried to contact Sherry in Norway, but she never responded. Given Heather's disabilities, It seemed unlikely she could have traveled overseas under the radar. Most likely, if she was still alive, she remained somewhere in California. But with Sherry out of reach and refusing to cooperate, authorities had no leads on where to look next, and no way to verify Heather's condition or whereabouts. Several theories have emerged to explain Heather Bloom's disappearance. The most direct suspicion falls on Sherry. As the last person with Heather, Sherry's odd behavior has led many to believe she knows exactly what happened. Her refusal to produce Heather on demand and her pattern of abruptly moving away suggest she may have been hiding something all along. Neighbors didn't report seeing Heather around at any time. This fuels a grim theory that Heather may have perished under Sherry's care, whether due to untreated health issues, an accident, or even something more sinister. For the first two options, there's always the potential that Sherry panicked and covered it up instead of reporting it. However, authorities have found no evidence of foul play and have not charged Sherry with any crime. Officially, Heather remains a missing person, not a confirmed crime victim. Another possibility is that Heather is alive but was secretly placed in a care facility or with a caretaker, and even the police have entertained this hopeful scenario. Perhaps Sherry became overwhelmed by the responsibility and, without telling anyone, arranged for Heather to live in a private care home or with another caregiver. It's even possible that she took her out of state to dump her off somewhere else, perhaps simply leaving her abandoned in a hospital waiting room. If so, Sherry's secretiveness could have been her way of avoiding legal trouble for abandoning her dependent sister. This theory lines up with the optimism police expressed, the hope that somewhere, Heather has been receiving the care she needs, even if her identity isn't known to authorities. However, so far, checks of hospitals and care homes haven't turned up any trace of Heather under another identity, but the possibility cannot be ruled out. Perhaps the most sinister allegation is that Heather's mother and sister colluded to make her quote-unquote disappear. Some have speculated that Phyllis might have willingly left Heather with Sherry as part of a plan. Moving Heather across the country would make her absence in New York much less noticeable, and would provide an easy explanation for why Heather was no longer there. However, this allegation falls apart extremely quickly under scrutiny. It was Phyllis who eventually sounded the alarm in 2009, an unlikely move if she had intended for Heather's disappearance to go unnoticed as it had been. Authorities have never implicated Phyllis in any wrongdoing, and officially she was a distraught parent seeking help to find her missing child. Though of course it's inescapable that even in the official version of events told by Phyllis, it appears she dumped off her disabled daughter with her non-disabled daughter. After that, Phyllis washed her hands clean of both of them for 4 years, which brings me to my next point. One lingering question is why Phyllis waited so long to report Heather missing, and what triggered her to eventually do so. It's an aspect of the case that continues to baffle observers. We may never know what was going through the mother's mind during those 4 years. What is certain is that the delay in reporting has made investigating Heather's disappearance that much more difficult. This lost time is one of the most frustrating facets of the case, leaving basically everyone to wonder if the outcome might have been different had the alarm been raised sooner. Another question that's been raised is who was cashing Heather's government checks intended for her care during those 4 years, if anyone. I suspect the authorities already know the answer to this question, and simply haven't released this to the public. However, I do question whether a forensic accountant has looked over the accounts of both Sherry and Phyllis, though I suspect that isn't possible since neither have been implicated officially. Today, nearly 20 years after she vanished, there is still no answer to Heather Bloom's fate. Heather would be in her late 40s now, but no one knows whether she is alive or not. However, I'm hopeful that the simplest solution is the accurate one in this case. Heather may have been abandoned as an unknown person somewhere safe, and she's now being cared for by the state. It's not ideal by any means, and it's both incredibly sad and infuriating, but the alternatives are so much more disturbing. Of course, the conduct of the sister and the mother is already disturbing regardless. Heather needed love and care, and it appears that at best, she got abandonment twice, by two of the people who were supposed to love and care for her most. So yeah, this is one of those stories that really makes me question humanity, which is saying a lot considering that I constantly research and cover dark content. In the early 1980s, San Marino, California was the picture of suburban tranquility. It was an affluent, insular community nestled near Los Angeles, a place of manicured lawns and quiet streets where serious crime felt like a distant abstraction. On one of these streets, Lorraine Road, lived a young couple just starting their life together. John Sohus, 27, was a quiet computer programmer who worked for a division of NASA. His wife, Linda, 28, was a talented and striking artist, standing 6 feet tall with auburn hair, who loved science fiction and worked at a local bookstore. They had married in 1983, and to get on their feet financially, moved into the main house of John's mother, Dee Dee. And just wait for it, because there was a guest house at play here, and it's going to factor into this story in a massive way. By all accounts, they were a happy, normal couple whose prospects were looking up. Linda had recently sold some major pieces at an art show, and they'd just bought a new pickup truck. Their domestic life, however, included an unusual element: a tenant living in Dee Dee's guest house. He called himself Christopher Chichester, a man who cultivated an air of eccentric importance. He was a master of social infiltration, understanding that in a community that valued pedigree, a fantastic story was often more compelling than a verifiable one. He told people he was a film student at the prestigious University of Southern California and hinted at royal lineage. He even handed out business cards that identified him as the 13th baronet of an ancient house, and at other times he name-dropped his Mountbatten cousins. For those of you who are unaware, Mountbatten is the official anglicization of the German name Battenberg, used by the House of Windsor, the British royal family. By dropping this slyly into conversations, he hinted to those in the know that he was from the high nobility at minimum. By joining a local church and charming the wealthy older residents, they gave him the social cover he needed to operate. They believed they were interacting with someone who could potentially be a real British royal. In return, he was able to semi-legitimately say he was friends with these wealthy and influential people. While many were intrigued, Linda wasn't, and she found Chichester creepy, and she and John made a point to avoid him. Then, in February 1985, the quiet life on Lorraine Road fractured. John and Linda told friends and family they were leaving for a couple of weeks for a top-secret government job interview for John in New York. After that, they simply vanished, leaving behind everything, including Linda's 4 beloved cats. In the weeks following the couple's disappearance, Christopher Chichester became the sole narrator of their story. He skillfully wove a tale designed to deflect suspicion and delay investigation, telling concerned friends that John and Linda were on a secret government mission and couldn't be contacted. To Dee Dee, he positioned himself as her official go-between, the only person who knew the details of her son's clandestine work. Initially, Dee Dee clung to this story, even repeating it to police and telling them she couldn't say more for fear of endangering the couple. But as weeks turned into months, the narrative began to fray. Bill collectors started calling for John and Linda, and friends grew more anxious. Dee Dee's confidence in Chichester crumbled, replaced by a creeping dread. She descended into the bottle and became a recluse, haunted by the silence from her son, and she perished in 1988, never knowing the truth of what happened to her son. The cover-up was a strange mix of elaborate cunning and breathtaking arrogance. To lend his story credibility, a series of postcards, seemingly written by Linda, were sent from Paris to her mother and friends. This was the cunning part, physical proof to sustain the lie long enough for him to make his escape. Yet, the execution was deeply flawed, and Linda's family knew she didn't have a passport or the money for a European trip. This recklessness was a core part of the perpetrator's psychology. When a San Marino detective finally came to the guest house to question him about the missing couple, Chichester met him at the door completely unclothed. He claimed to be a nudist and refused to dress up at all, just letting it all hang out for the detective. It was a bizarre act of dominance and deflection that ended the interview, and shortly after this encounter, Chichester also vanished. I really question how the detective managed to be taken seriously after letting a criminal escape in such a bizarre way. The case went cold until 1988, when the couple's pickup truck was discovered in Greenwich, Connecticut. The man who had been driving it, now using the alias Christopher Crowe, disappeared before police could question him. The mystery lay dormant for years, and Didi Sohus's house on Lorraine Road was sold, and the strange story of the vanished couple faded into local lore. Then, in May 1994, the new owners decided to install a swimming pool in the backyard. As excavators dug into the earth, they struck something solid. It was a fiberglass box containing plastic bags, and inside were the dismembered remains of a body. Forensic analysis revealed the remains belonged to an adult white male who had been slain through savage violence. The victim's skull had been crushed by multiple blows from a blunt object, and his body had been subject to further indignities. The brutality suggested a crime of intense personal rage, while the methodical dismemberment and burial pointed to a cold-blooded attempt to conceal the evidence. Though police strongly suspected the victim was John Sohus, confirming it was a challenge. John had been adopted, so there were no known biological relatives against whom to compare DNA samples. It wasn't until 2011, with the advent of new forensic technology, that the bones were conclusively identified as those of John. While the Sohus case languished, the man once known as Christopher Chichester was busy constructing a new life, or rather, a series of them. After fleeing California, the German immigrant Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter moved to Greenwich, Connecticut, and reinvented himself as Christopher Crowe, a supposed Hollywood producer. He was a charming man who spoke German fluently, and no one who speaks German could be a bad man, right? He talked his way into jobs at Wall Street brokerage firms, but his cons were clumsy. He was fired from one after it was discovered he was using the social security number of serial predator David Berkowitz. He then moved on to his most audacious and successful impersonation. Relocating to New York and Boston, he became Clark Rockefeller, an eccentric and reclusive heir to the legendary American dynasty. As Rockefeller, Gerhardsreiter achieved the status he had always craved. He joined exclusive clubs, wore ascots, and spun tales of his fabulous fictional life. His ultimate act of validation came when he met and married Sandra Boss. She was a highly successful Harvard Business School graduate and a partner at the consulting firm McKinsey. Her unimpeachable credentials gave his fraudulent identity a powerful veneer of legitimacy. Despite Boss being the sole breadwinner, earning over $1 million a year, Gerhardsreiter maintained absolute control over her finances and her life. The carefully constructed world he built began to collapse when Boss filed for divorce in 2007. She had begun to suspect that the entire identity he had constructed was indeed a complete lie, and while she wasn't able to figure who he was, she figured out he wasn't Clark Rockefeller. For a narcissist like Gerhardt's writer, the loss of control was an intolerable injury. On July 27, 2008, during a supervised visit in Boston, he executed a planned abduction of their 7-year-old daughter. The kidnapping triggered a massive FBI manhunt that put the face of Clark Rockefeller on news broadcasts across the country and in Canada. The Rockefeller family quickly clarified that they had no idea who this guy was, and that he had no connection whatsoever to the famous family. It was this crime, born of desperation and hubris, that would finally solve the slaying he had committed 23 years earlier. A week later, he was arrested in Baltimore, where he had already set up a new life as Chip Smith, a yacht captain. The national publicity surrounding the case blew the lid off his 30-year con. Fingerprints taken after his arrest were matched to prints on an old immigration document. This definitively proved that Clark Rockefeller, Christopher Crowe, and Christopher Chichester were all the same person, Christian Karl Gerhardtsreiter. It turned out that he had arrived in America in 1978 as a foreign exchange student and had charmed his way into a sham marriage for a green card. In 2011, while nearing the end of his Massachusetts prison sentence for kidnapping, Christian Gerhardtsreiter was charged with the slaying of John Sohus. The trial, which began in 2013, was a masterclass in prosecutorial storytelling. With no strong forensic evidence or witnesses to the crime, the case was built circumstantially. The prosecution wove together a damning narrative from the clues Gerhardtsreiter had carelessly left behind. The most crucial pieces of evidence were 2 plastic bags found wrapped around John's skull. One was from the bookstore at the University of Southern California. The other was from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Gerhardtsreiter had attended classes at both schools, effectively leaving his calling card in the grave. And honestly, it's things like this that make me wonder how this buffoon was able to pull off his cons for so long. Witnesses from San Marino, now elderly, testified about his strange behavior. A church acquaintance recalled Gerhardtsreiter borrowing a chainsaw around the time the couple disappeared. Another remembered him trying to sell a fancy Turco-Persian rug that appeared to have very unusual stains on it. The witness hadn't bought the rug, so it couldn't be tested to prove anything with certainty, but it was yet another piece of evidence against this predatory con man. The defense, acknowledging their client was a grifter, employed a strategy of misdirection that mirrored Gerhardtsreiter's own methods. They pointed the finger at the one person who couldn't defend herself, the missing Linda Sohus. They argued that Linda, a tall, physically imposing woman, was more capable of the attack than Gerhardtsreiter, which I have to say is probably as audacious as it is disgusting. They entered into evidence the postcards from Paris, which they claimed proved she was alive after John was slain, but despite this, the jury wasn't convinced. I'm going to give you a second to guess how this defense worked out, and I mean a literal second here. In April 2013, after deliberating for less than a day, they found Christian Gerhardtsreiter guilty in the first degree. He was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. The verdict finally brought answers to the family of John Sohus. After nearly 3 decades of uncertainty, the perpetrator had been held accountable, but the conviction only solved half of the mystery that began on that quiet San Marino street in 1985, and the question of what happened to Linda Sohus remains unanswered. Her body has never been found, and she is still officially classified as an endangered missing person. The prevailing theory, held by prosecutors and investigators, is that Gerhardtsreiter eliminated her as well. disposing of her body in a location that has never been discovered. The defense's theory that she was the perp who fled was a courtroom tactic unsupported by any evidence whatsoever, aside from the likely fake postcard from Paris. Gerhardt's writer himself has claimed that Linda is still alive, even hinting at his sentencing that he had information about her whereabouts. This appears to have been one last attempt by this sick individual to try to assert power, though it appears no one was buying what he was selling.